Hi folks, this is lesson C12.1 Structure of DNA. So at the start of chapter 12, what we're going to be looking at throughout all of this is how information can be encoded in people in order and other living creatures in order to allow us to pass on to later organisms traits that we carry and basically have the building blocks to create other life that is similar to what has come before it. So, if you have a little brother or sister, or somebody, a cousin or something like that, a newborn, you'll often hear people looking at these little babies, or even when they get a little bit older, and say, oh, they look so much like their father, or they have their mother's nose, or something like that. Maybe they pull out pictures of the mother or father from when they were younger and say, oh, look at how much they look the same. Well, how is it that a baby can have so many characteristics that can be matched up with a characteristic from their parents? It all comes down to genetics. Genetics is the study in science of how information is encoded in something called DNA that allows copies to be made from one generation to the next of organisms that have the same general structures, the same sort of format, so that humans have human babies and cows have baby cows. How this is all able to happen, how this process works. So, in genetics, what we're looking at are specific characteristics that are passed on from parents to offspring. Those are the terms that we're going to use because it actually can be used irregardless of whether it's humans or not. And in genetics, we can actually talk about how this has been happening for hundreds of years. Now, that doesn't mean that people hundreds of years ago understood the exact science of what was going on, but definitely farmers were looking at plants that they were growing. And maybe a particular type of apple tree was growing that grew faster and gave fruit that could withstand an early frost better than other apples in the orchard. And what they would do is they would take samples from that one tree and splice it in with another tree that maybe also had some great characteristics that they liked in that plant. And they would try to have a new tree come that would have characteristics shared from both. That's a wonderful way to try to get crops that are more resilient, that grow faster, that have higher yields. This is something that farmers have done forever with plants and also other livestock. In modern times, we've gone far beyond those sort of this random, I hope it works, let's try to see if we can splice together different organisms by just crossing two different plants or something, or two different cows that we have. Now we can get in and actually at the level of the DNA itself change the characteristics that we want. That's where we get into what is sometimes called genetically modified organisms, GMOs. Now, all of this means that we're getting down to the encoding that's happening in DNA. Your body is made up of about 10 trillion cells, and inside every one of those cells is a nucleus that's kind of, the boss for the cell. And that nucleus holds chromosomes that have the encoding in their DNA of every little rule of how to build you. Those are genes. The particular characteristics are encoded into genes. So, who figured this out? Well, it's actually a relatively recent discovery. James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953, which really isn't that long ago, finally figured out that that's the structure DNA has. And what they were able to see is that the whole thing was made of these DNA molecules that have two strands that meet in the middle, kind of makes it look a little bit like a ladder, and then that whole thing is twisted around itself to make what looks more like a spiral staircase, and that's where the name a double helix structure comes from. That's how we describe what it looks like. So this is what we would kind of see if we could go into your cell, into a nucleus, and grab a chromosome. The chromosomes themselves, most of them have an X shape. And if we unraveled them, kind of like we're pulling apart the yarn on a sweater, we would be able to stretch out the DNA into that spiral helix sort of structure. And then we'd notice that the DNA itself is made up of what are called base pairs. These are chemical structures where always C joins with G and A always joins with T. And they go in this sequence over and over and over again. And you might say, well, how can that store all the information of how to make a person? Well, if you think about it, we store information in a similar way with an even simpler system than this. Everything that's stored inside a computer is binary, zeros and ones, and we can store incredibly huge amounts of complex information that way. So imagine if we had a system that had another set of pairs other than just binary 0 and 1, because that's what the base pairs in DNA have. That's where they're actually even a better system for storing information. Now, the chromosomes themselves, inside a typical healthy human, we will find 46 chromosomes divided into 23 pairs. And you can see this image I've got off to the right there. That's a karyotype for a person. That means that what we've done is we've taken the 46 chromosomes and we've matched them up. You can see that they actually have similar sizes, and some of them are longer and some of them are smaller. That's where all of the information is coming from. One of the chromosomes in each of those pairs comes from the father, and the other one comes from the mother. Now, the 23rd pair in the sequence is special. Those are usually referred to as the sex chromosomes. And in most children, a female will be born with a double X pair in the 23rd chromosome, and males will be born with an XY pair. Although there are other combinations that can occur. Now, in humans, 99.9% of that DNA is exactly the same in every one of us, because all of us have like a stomach, a heart, a brain, a spinal column, skin, and all of those things are basically built the same way. Now, what makes you individually different so that you might be taller and maybe your liver is a little bit bigger than somebody else's, or the facial characteristics you have, and all those things that make you individually you actually accounts for only 0.1% of what's encoded in your DNA. Now, the kooky thing is that means that even if we look at other organisms, most of their DNA is going to be the same as ours, because living creatures on Earth have the same mechanisms that allow them to be alive. And that's where we can actually use genetics to look back at how organisms have evolved over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years on our planet, and how they're interrelated to each other. So if we actually started comparing DNA, a banana has 60% the same DNA as you, which I know is crazy, but a banana is not a human. But a banana has a lot of the same life functions that have to be done, whether it's even just things like the mitochondria that are using glucose to have structures. That stuff's the same. A slug is 70% the same as us. Dogs share 84% of the same DNA as us, which now we're getting closer and closer to us, because a dog is a mammal and obviously very different, but dogs are mammals. They give birth to live young, all that sort of stuff. They make them very similar to us. Pigs are incredibly close to us. We share 98% of our DNA. That's why even when we're doing dissections in bio classes, we'll quite often do pig's hearts because they are essentially identical structures to humans. And that also means that we are looking at ways of actually using pig organs as donations to humans. The same problem with having rejection that can happen with a human transplant is still there. But for obvious reasons, it's a little bit easier to get pig's hearts. So if we can actually find ways to reliably stop those organs from being rejected, this would actually be an incredible advantage for people waiting for organ donations. Finally, 98.8% of our DNA and a chimp's DNA are the same. They are our closest living relatives. And that's why when we look back, no, nobody is suggesting we evolved from monkeys. That is one of the biggest misconceptions of what this means. What it means is if we go back far enough, there is a common ancestor that split off into animals like gorillas and chimps, and what eventually evolved into humans. We share a common ancestor. It means that if we were written by DNA the same way a book is written, with an average of about 60,000 words in a book, only 720 of those words would need to be changed in your book to become the book that is written for a chimp. It's just a way of you realizing how close we are to so many other forms of life on the earth and how much we can learn about ourselves by studying those other organisms. I hope this helps you out, and I wish you the best of luck with your studies.